Hi Sec 2. So for today's lesson, we'll be talking about the political parties in Singapore during the late 1940s to the 1960s. And you would have done this in your graphic organizer on your content package, page 19. So today's lesson will be a review of your understanding from the organizer. And also, let's go to the lesson objectives. Number 1, identify the aims and background of the political parties in Singapore. And number 2, complete a compare and contrast practice of political parties in the 1950s. And that will be using your skills package, page 14. Now, before we start with the graphic organizer, I just want to set the context of what is going on in our current content that we have studied so far. So to recap, when the British returned at the end of the war to Singapore, what was the situation? How were people feeling? And what were some of the common trends that was happening in Singapore? Number 1, it triggered a lot of anti-British feelings because many of the people in Singapore felt that the British had abandoned them when they left during the war, right? So you can recap all the things that you have learned so far, and that's what led to the anti-British feeling. Number 2, there was a rise of political consciousness or political awareness, meaning that people were more and more interested in politics and the political future of Singapore. Why? If you recap in the previous lesson, you would have studied the reasons. One would be rise of communism. Another would be because many countries around Singapore were becoming independent. And also in Singapore itself, because of the anti-British feelings and the protests, they didn't like the British and they wanted to have full control over their own country. So that's why there was the rise of political consciousness. And the last one was constitutional changes. Because of all these anti-British feelings and the losing of trust in the British decided to change the constitution, change the laws of Singapore in two ways: the right to vote and control over the government. They were giving more control to the people of Singapore over the government. Now, the first political party that you would have studied would be the Singapore Progressive Party, also known as SPP, and they were formed in 1947, basically just 2 years after the war. Now, they were made up of multiracial people, mainly English educated, businessmen, and they also opened their membership to the British, meaning that the British who wanted to join this political party could also join. And their aims and beliefs, the very big idea for them was self-government. I will explain this term later on, okay, because some of you may not understand what this actually means. Number 2, they also welcomed the idea of working with the British to help them achieve self-government. They wanted to introduce changes gradually, not a very big change suddenly. And also, their aim was to win support of English speaking rather than the Chinese immigrants. Although the Chinese immigrants or the Chinese group of people form a very large percentage in Singapore itself. Now, before we go on, what is the difference between self-government and independence? Because there were these two aims that certain political parties wanted either self-government or independence, but what is the difference? Now, self-government and independence both would want the locals to control and rule themselves and their own country's affairs. Basically, the locals themselves want to just take charge of all the affairs. Okay, but for self-government, it also means that the colonial power had some control over the affairs still. Whereas for independence, the colonial power has lost control over the country and has granted freedom, total freedom to the country itself. Okay, so later on in the years of Singapore's history, you would see how self-government and independence actually played out. Okay, but you must be sure that there's a difference between the two ideas. Now, the second political party, the Labour Front political party, It was formed just after a year from SVP in 1948. They were also made up of multiracial people, but there was also the low-income people which were part of this party, English educated, and they were members of trade unions. Now, trade unions are groups of people who fought for workers' rights, who fought for workers' interests. And the Labour Front Party had a very large percentage of members who were from the trade unions. What were the aims and beliefs of the party? They were largely anti-communist. They believed in working with the British to attain self-government, similarly with SPP. However, the Labour Front was significantly different in a sense that they really fought for the workers' rights and working conditions to be improved and to protect the workers' interests. Now, the significant leaders of Labour Front, you need to know these two people because you will be coming back to them later on in the later years. So they were also the founding members of Labour Front, David Marshall and Lim Yew Hock. You would hear more about them as to how they led the party in the upcoming elections. The last party will be the People's Action Party. You may be quite familiar with them. Okay, and they were formed in 21st November 1954, so much later on in the years. They were also made up of a multiracial group of people, also English educated, and they formed lawyers, journalists, trade unionists as part of the members in this political party. Now, the aims and beliefs of this party, PAP, was that they were against the British colonial rule, totally against them. The difference in the aims of what they wanted was that they wanted immediate independence, compared to SPP and Labour Front, who wanted self-government. And how did they want to achieve immediate independence was that they wanted to unite Singapore and Malaya, and they strongly aimed to win the support of the masses, meaning everyone, not only certain groups of people. Now, the significant leaders of the PAP, you need to know who these four people are because they will be coming back into the picture in the later years. So, from left to right, Dr. Toh Chin Chye, Mr. Lee Kuan Yew, you will have known, Dr. Goh Keng Swee, and S. Rajaratnam. Now, this picture you would have seen before in the constitutional changes lesson. Okay, so I'm going to explain how it affected the elections over the years from 1948 to 1959. So in 1948, when there was very little people voting because voting was not compulsory, the elections then was actually won by SPP, basically because SPP was founded in 1947 and it was one of the first few political parties to actually run for elections. In 1955 and 1959, as more people voted, we will see later on who were the ones who actually won the elections with the rising number of people that could vote in these elections. So this is a quick overview of all the political parties that we have covered so far. In a quick glance, you can see the similarities and differences between who they were made up of and also the aims and beliefs of the party. Okay, but one of the common agendas and one of the common aims that all three political parties had was that they wanted an increase in the control of the government, meaning that they wanted to have more local participation in the government itself. And how did they want that local participation? They either wanted it through self-government or immediate independence. Okay, so this is the end of the content part of the three political parties. The next part would be to practice it into your comparison practice 2 aims of political parties on your skills package page 14. So can you refer to that page and complete the CNC practice before you continue this video. Okay, please note that you only need to complete one paragraph, either one similarity or one difference. Welcome back. So you should have finished that comparison paragraph, either a similarity or a difference, before you continue this video, because I will be going through the answers right now. So let's look at the question first. To what extent are the sources similar in telling us about political parties in Singapore in the 1950s? Explain your answer. By right, you should be giving both similarity and difference, but for now, we just require you to do one paragraph. So source B is an online article on Singapore's 1955 election. If you read the content, it talks about David Marshall, what's the aims of Labour Front, what is the impact if Labour Front were to win the election. And in source C, it talks about PAP in the 1950s, its objective or its aim, what its impact would be as well, and also what its symbol symbolizes. Okay, so if you look at the two sources, you should be able to pick out either a similarity or a difference. So firstly, we are going to explore the difference because I think that this is a bit easier than the similarity. I'm going to go through the 6 steps in answering a comparison question, so make sure you have all the 6 in your answer. Number 1, sources B and C are different. You answer the question. What is the common criteria to show that they are different? Both sources disagree in the aims of the political parties in Singapore in the 1950s. And if you look at the two sources, the aims are very clearly different. And from your own knowledge, you would also know that Labour Front and PAP have very different aims. The evidence from source B states, Labour Front called for immediate self-government through unity with the Federation of Malaya. This means that self-governance was the main aim of Labour Front. Correct? In the evidence itself, it says it wanted self-government. However, the evidence from source C states, during its formative years, the main objectives of the PAP were to seek for the independence of Singapore through merger with the Federation of Malaya. This means that independence was the main aim of PAP in the 1950s. So, source B says that the aim was self-government, whereas source C says the aim was immediate independence. Therefore, sources B and C are different. Okay, so this difference is very clear, very simple to tell that the aims are definitely different. But what is the similarity? So now we go on to the similarity. Step 1, sources B and C are similar. What is the common criteria to show that they are similar? Is that both sources agree in the merging with Malaya for the benefit of Singapore. How? How do both evidence show that? The evidence from B states Labour Front called for immediate self-government through the unity with Malaya. This means that with merging with Malaya, self-governance could be achieved by Singapore. And similarly, the evidence from source C states the main objectives of PAP were to seek for the independence of Singapore through the merger with Malaya. This means that independence could occur when Singapore merges with Malaya. So you can see from both sources, they wanted to achieve their aims, but only if they merge with Malaya. So the merging with Malaya part is both similar, and therefore both sources C and B are similar. Okay, one thing I want to highlight about this is that you can see how I use the same evidence, but I interpret it differently. I interpreted it as a similarity, but I can also use it as a difference. Okay, so just be clear about this. If we only ask you to give us one paragraph, actually both evidence can be used for both the similarity and the difference, but you have to give, if you have to give 2 paragraphs, then of course you will need 2 different evidence itself. Okay, I hope that this lesson is clear for you, and if you have any clarifications, please clarify with your teachers. Thank you very much for listening. Hope you enjoyed the lesson.